We're going to have a conversation now for about 15 minutes or so. Chris, Brenton, Grace, and I'm going to invite Tony Herbert up as well. Tony is going to speak last, but he's obviously a key person in this discussion. So any questions from the floor for our speakers? We've heard about terrestrial and aquatic birds, and we've heard about fish.
This is a question for you, Grace. What are your thoughts on the floodplain fueling the terrestrial ecosystem? And you pointed it out with your birds, saying that there are higher abundances of woodland birds after high flows. That to me says that there's a flow of energy from the floodplain to the terrestrial ecosystem. It's something I've probably banged on a little bit about. People, Chris and Brenton, who've worked with me in the past, have sort of, we hear about the heartbeat of the river and the flood pulse concept. I also think that there might be a dual role of the floodplain, that it also, because it's probably a much more productive environment than the adjacent highland ecosystems. I won't say highland, but the non-floodplain ecosystems. That plays that role. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
More a statement than a question, but I'd just like to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. When I looked a little bit into the literature around that, there was some evidence to suggest that boom in productivity, the primary and secondary productivity from a flood, gets translated directly to the adjacent terrestrial ecosystems through a whole variety of mechanisms. So predators, but also by driving movement towards the floodplain. I like the fact that you're thinking about it too, thinking about the flora side of things. There's certainly, I think, interchange between the mallee and the terrace ecosystems and the floodplain all the time. A variety of animals, not just birds. But yeah, I'm not quite as familiar with that sort of literature as well, but I agree with you. Does that answer the question?
There's actually some good literature from the Northern Hemisphere on salmonids, which migrate from the sea. The adults migrate from the sea up into rivers to spawn, and then bears remove the dead salmon, and the nutrients from the sea end up fueling the riparian ecosystem in those rivers. So yeah, it's sort of a different mechanism, but yeah, the river is fueling the riparian zone. So.
I think your thought-provoking comment at the end, Brenton, about some kind of freshwater reserve status, to me, I wonder if you also want to comment about, is Chowla the canary in the mine? Is it the litmus test for water management in the Murray-Darling Basin, given that it is the system that virtually has every wetland type that you'll find in the Murray-Darling Basin in one place? It's a product of flow in the Darling, the northern rivers and the southern rivers. It is just below the junction of the Murray and the Darling. And there we are at a significant spot in the Delta where now we've got a body of research that runs for 2 decades, and then there was pioneering work before that. So is the value of that work and the significance of its place, does it command a kind of this is the indicator type place we want to bank future water management on?
Potentially, yes. And I think we're sort of preaching to the converted here. Chowla is quite a unique place because of the diversity of aquatic ecosystems and wetland ecosystems. The nature of the interventions that have been undertaken as well. I mean, the concept of using a regulator. Regulators are being rolled out not only in South Australia, but in many places upstream. And so the learning from that as well is important. The longevity of the data sets is unique. These 20-year data sets, and if you're going to continue monitoring anywhere, somewhere like Chowla, I think should be it. And you're right, it captures the patterns and the processes that sort of are occurring across the southern basin. So maybe it is like a canary in the coal mine. Yep.
I think I mean, Chowla is unique in some respects, but it is also potentially very valuable and instructive for other sites and other projects contemplating, works at this scale. Certainly the knowledge we've gleaned from Chowla has been used in our thinking at places like Pike and Catarapco. It's useful for places like the Lindsay system where they're looking at almost an identical concept on that Anna branch. So what we've heard and seen and learned tonight is potentially of great value to other projects looking at similar sorts of endeavours.
Thanks. So we saw the importance of those flood events for flow-cued spawning fish like golden perch, Murray cod. Can you talk about the role Water for the Environment has in creating some of those conditions for recruitment in those species?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Adrian. Great question. When I was trying to explain my hydrograph before, hopefully I was clear with it. I don't know how clear I was, but I was trying to demonstrate, I think, that the influence that environmental water has had on the hydrograph in recent years, particularly in comparison to the Millennium Drought. And what it has done is has really not completely brought back a spring pulse, but every year a key objective of the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder is to create a pulse in the river, in the Lower River Murray. And that's often done by trying to coordinate discharge from a range of different upstream sources. Now, there has actually been a general increase in abundance of Murray cod in the Lower River Murray in recent years, and recruitment is happening a lot more regularly than we used to see. And I'm pretty confident that that has to do in large part to that water that is delivered in spring and supports those spring flow pulses more, because it really provides conditions that are more appropriate for the spawning and survival of those fish in the main channel of the river. So, yep, I'm really quite confident in saying I think in recent years environmental flow has been supporting Murray cod in particular in South Australia. Yep.
Tony, I know you asked for questions, and I hope you don't mind if I make a comment as someone who was involved in this from the very beginning, as was Tony and some other people in this room, that I've been out of it for 10 to 12 years now, and my understanding of what's been going on has really been driven by what I've heard on the radio, largely in relation to the political arguments that go on about water recovery, etc. And that being the perspective that I've had those years, I became very disillusioned. And I have to say that listening to the presentations today and seeing where it's gone now and the results of the monitoring over this very long period of time is so heartening that it's I actually feel quite emotional about it, really. And I just want to say thank you so much to all those people who have hung in for this long and have seen this whole process move from what was initially really largely a political had a political impetus to one where the science is now driving the decisions. And it's just fantastic to see it come that far. And I pick up on your point, Brenton, about now looking at the connectivity. I guess the crude decision initially to provide that connectivity was to add the River Murray itself, the River Murray Channel, as another icon site. But I think the science will provide the answers to answering that challenge that you've really thrown out there. It's I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't have made a statement, but I just can't help it. So pleased with what I've heard.
Yeah, I think it's a great statement.
Judy.
Really. It's so great that it's heartening, Judy, for you, and it's so great you've made the effort to obviously be here tonight.
Just on that note of the River Channel is an icon site, and actually I think it's taken not 20 years, but maybe 15 or 16 years to mature, but the channel is more and more so being managed and flow in the channel for environmental outcomes. Tony sits on the Southern Connected Basin Environmental Watering Committee, SCUBEC, Tony's partners from across the state sit down now and try and manage environmental water along the channel in a connected manner for environmental outcomes. And so, yeah, it's... Say something about it.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think 20 years ago, we were arguing with the other states about a thimble full of water to water our most important site during a drought. Nowadays, a lot of our conversations are about how do you align the flows out of the Goulburn with the Bidgie and out of Hume to create the sorts of flows that are going to do the things we've heard tonight from Bicey and PZ about breeding Murray cod and golden perch. So the conversation has shifted an enormous amount in the last 20 years. And we've, from a South Australian perspective, we've always advocated that setting up the flows for the entire river channel, the system, the channel icon site, is fundamentally important. What we can do with the regulators at Chowder and other sites is almost a secondary consideration. They have to fit with how the river is being managed rather than having the tail wag the dog. But there has been big change in how we've thought about delivering environmental water down the River Murray.
Great comment, Tony. Yes.
This one's for you, Grace. I'm just wondering, do migratory birds, like the international migration, are they interacting with environmental water floodplain operations in the same way they are with those giant floods?
Oh, that's a great question. I think we saw a similar species diversity of the migratory waders across those 4 years. And every time they were observed, they were in those outer lakes. I think the timing of the water, the inundation is really critical to them. So they need early spring inundation of those broader lakes on Chowler as they're making their way south and potentially elsewhere. And so the flood, it potentially eliminated some of those foraging areas in the inner floodplain. But on the outer floodplain, there were certainly a lot of options for them. So the timing of a flood would be quite key. They also need water in late autumn on their way back again. So in terms of productivity, there was a whole lot of productivity during the flood, but they need really shallow water to forage in. They have tiny legs, and that's quite key. So they can't have deep water. So we need to create those shallow flats, whether it's through a flood or through a simulated flood. Yeah.
One more question, please.
Just a quick one. It was mentioned if monitoring continues. I would like everybody in this room to fight for monitoring has to continue so that science and everything else has to take. You've got to have to be able to measure something to be able to make decisions. So that's for everybody to keep fighting for monitoring. And the other thing is, from the CAP who've come up here, thank you for having us. It's been absolutely fantastic, and it's been a privilege to sit here and take part and listen to all what's gone on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely comments. Wonderful comments. Okay, please thank our panel discussion. Tony, Grace, Brenton and Chris.